Hi, Richard here. This is part 3 of making my own action figure stands. I'm going to cast using the molds made in the previous video. According to the vendor, this material requires 1 drop of catalyst to 1 gram of resin, so I measured them out separately and then mixed them together thoroughly. Supposedly I have about 5 or 6 minutes of working time. A way to gauge about how much resin to mix is to make note of the amount of plastiline recovered from each model and do the math from there. I also have here some molds from my usefull project to pour any excess resin I might have. The cure time for this resin wasn't very specific, so I let it sit till the next day. Demolding was easy, but even though the resin cured pretty much bubble-free without a pressure pot, air got trapped where the foot pegs go. So all but one of these casts are useful for how they were intended. So later I'll grind those little bits down and use them as simple bases for other types of figures. Other than that little hiccup, the pieces came out pretty decent, including the extras. Now for a second pour. I didn't show it with the first, but I prepped the molds by dusting them with some plain talcum powder. It helps the resin grab the texture and extends the life of the mold, as far as I know. For this pour, I'm going to add a powder as an additive, which the vendor calls carga, which I believe is calcium carbonate. The ratio of resin to powder is 1:1 by weight, adding catalyst relative to just the resin. So in this case, it's 150 grams of powder and the same amount of resin, mixing thoroughly until it's a creamy consistency free of lumps. Then the catalyst is added, 150 drops counted out in a separate container. This time, as I pour the resin, I poked the peg holes with a paper clip to break the air pockets. But by the time I get to the extra molds, the resin is already stiffening. It seems the added powder reduced the work time. The demolding was just as easy as before, and the pegs came out better this time. But after the first fitting on a test figure, I noticed that the pegs don't fit as snug as the original stands. It seems this resin shrinks by a tiny fraction of a millimeter, which causes the figure to fit a little loose. I'm gonna have to look for other resins that won't give this problem of shrinkage, or check later if there's a way to modify the mold to correct this little problem. Other than that, this second pour came out better than the first. For the last pour, I use plain plaster. I figure I need a little less than 2 cups of plaster for all the molds. So I start with half of that amount in water, and then add the plaster all around loosely so it soaks in the water properly. I stop adding plaster when it won't sink anymore, and a small island forms at the top. I prep the molds by spritzing them with a little bit of diluted liquid dish soap. This helps reduce surface tension of the plaster and also reduces bubbles. Again, I poke out any trapped air from the peg holes. I like to skim the top of the pour to level out what will be the underside of the cast, so I won't need to smooth it down later with blades or sandpaper. About 30 or 40 minutes after pouring the plaster, I start with the demolding. I first pull the sides lightly and then push from the center around where the foot peg would be. With the piece out, I can do some quick cleaning and a little light detailing since the plaster is still a little bit humid. I know the pegs won't hold well in plaster. The stress of the figure will break them off easily. I just wanted to see how they come out. I'll most likely break the pegs off myself and use these casts also as bases for other figures. If the base side of the cast has irregularities and doesn't look quite flat, I can take a wide putty knife and scrape the face so it ends up flat and smooth before demolding. When the plaster turns white and doesn't feel cold anymore, that will mean that it's pretty much dry. Then it can be worked with paints, sealers, primers, whatever. Well, these are my stands, cast 3 different ways: plain resin, resin with an additive, and plain plaster. I hope these videos are helpful or inspiring for any projects you might have. Catch you later, and thanks for watching.